Hello everyone, I'm Sameen and my co-host for the session is Swarnim.
Hello. So we're here today to commemorate the Day of Independence and pledge to be actions to prevent harm.
Today we complete 74 years of independence. It is a celebration of freedom. But with figures like 1 in 2 children being sexually abused, are we really free? This is not to be a cynic, but it is to be hopeful of the future that we could have and to work towards it. Sakshi
And
is a capacity building organization with a special focus on preventing sexual violence against women and children, whereas the Rakshan project aims at stopping child sexual abuse and creating a community of Rakshans. Sonia?
so at this point, it's my pleasure to invite Dr. Malvika Bini. She's an assistant professor in the Department of History at SRM University. Her research interests includes gender history, histories of science, and spatial or landscape archaeology. And she completed a PhD from Jawaharlal Nehru University in ancient history. So, on that note, very warm welcome to Dr. Malvika Bini.
Thanks a lot. Thank you and happy Independence Day to you and all your
Happy
viewers.
Independence Day.
Happy
Happy Independence
Independence
Day.
Day. I would like to tell everyone that Malvika ma'am was my contemporary history teacher in college back in 2016. Her assignment questions used to always make me stop and think. I never thought that a day would come when I will be questioning her like this. So, how are you, ma'am?
I'm good, I'm good. History has been kind to me. Both personal history and history, the discipline has been very kind to me.
That's
And
great to hear.
like your batch, I mean, your batch was an exceptional batch with a lot of wonderful students. And I continue to be blessed with really good students. And I think the wealth of any teacher is having great students. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I've been blessed that way.
So, you must be taking online classes now. How's the shift been to online from offline?
Actually, as a teacher who likes to do things hands-on, if you remember our classes, I'd like
Yeah.
walk along the aisle and maybe look at your notebooks or share a joke with you or two, or sit in the canteen. And
That
I
used to be
miss all
scary.
that. I miss all that terribly.
Right.
And at the same time, the new format of teaching is also a format of learning for us teachers because our students teach us a lot. For instance, my students have been teaching me how to use emoticons effectively in class. So it's also also a process of learning. And very recently, I learned that the chat box is
Yeah.
something that you can initiate great conversations in. So it's also a process of learning for us teachers. Though I miss the warmth of the classroom, to be very honest with you. So, for instance, half the class would be just alphabets in front of me in like matchbooks, like columns. So you don't get to see the student. So the usual visual cues that you get, whether they're understanding, not understanding, when you crack a joke, you only hear maybe your laughter. That's it. So that one-on-one interaction with students, that the feel of the classroom, I do miss that. I mean, that can't
I
be
really miss
substituted.
the discussion that we used to have in classes. Right now, it's just it feels like a monologue from the professor's side. So
Oh,
that's
yeah,
yeah.
that's true. That's true. That's absolutely true. Probably in a semester's time, maybe we'll be back to a new normal. Who knows?
Hopefully,
Or we'd get familiar. Like human beings have that capacity. Like I teach my students in my human civilizations classroom that we adapt, and whenever we adapt, a new normal sets in, and then soon that will become familiar to us. Now, whether it's for the better or the worse is something that we can debate.
So I think the first thing that I picked up from what you just said, and to which I personally connect, is that so I've recently been working with a very young team, which also happens to include Sameen as a part of it, and I have also been learning a lot of new things from the younger generation. As you've been learning emoticons, I have been learning how specifically Instagram works. So
Oh.
I think I think that is one place where we 100% connect, and I totally understand how during this pandemic, during this lockdown, there's so many new things that we're learning, especially from the younger generation. And also from there, I was actually, before the session, I was discussing with Sameen, and she was telling me that you have a doctorate in ancient history with your thesis on gender and the history of science. So would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Of course, of course. Which researcher won't? So I I started with this question of how the body was represented in ancient India, because I felt that the theme of the body is one which connects a lot of things, whether it is gender, whether it is sexuality, whether it is the corporeal exercises of the state in terms of, let's say, when you hang a person, what you're
Mm-hmm.
doing is actually taking away that person's agency over his or her own body. So body is a theme which ties together a lot of other themes. So hence my interest in the body. And once I started looking at ancient Indian sources, both Sanskrit sources, Tamil sources, as well as archaeological sources, it was understood that there is no one perception of the body. You have multiple ideas of the body. For instance, if you look at Ayurvedic literature, which is the major chunk of my research sources on, so if you look at Ayurvedic literature, there's a particular way in which the body is represented in Ayurveda as being constituted of the three humors, the Vayu or the Vada, Kapha, and Pitta. So that's one conception of the body. But in other sources, for instance, if you look at the Smriti literature, like the Manusmriti, you might have heard of it, or the Yajnavalkya Smriti, these are prescriptions for people to follow. There you'd have also the representation of a lower caste body, which is fundamentally different from that of an upper caste body. Or you'd have the representation of a female body, which
Mm-hmm.
is understood to be a highly polluting body and a pollutive body as well. Similarly, a Dalit body or an untouchable body, or the body of a lower caste person or an aged person, is understood to be one which you have to distance yourself from. So you have that. And back to the Ayurvedic records, initially there are also references to intersexed bodies. So, for instance, people who are born with the genital organs or the reproductive organs of both the sexes. So, if you look at early Ayurvedic literature, what you find is these births are understood to be anoka, amusing. They're not derided, they're not ridiculed at, but there is a certain understanding that such births also happen. And then there are discourses on how to understand such kinds of books. But when you move from the early period towards the medieval period, and particularly to the medieval period, you have a reduction of these bodies as just bodily disorders. So they now just thought of as infertility disorders.
Mm-hmm.
They're not thought of as full-fledged living people, full-blooded
Mm-hmm.
people. So from, let's say, a representation of a kliba or a shanda or a shandi, or let's say that of an asekya in the early texts like the Sushruta Samhita or the Charaka Samhita, you have a reduction of them into just into problems of impotency.
Mm-hmm.
So you do have, and then similarly, if you look at female bodies, one sees that there is a lot of prescriptions and proscriptions, and words of cautions that are prescribed for women. And it is nothing. It is very little to do with medicine, by the way. Now you'd feel that it's an Ayurvedic text you're looking at. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe the injections are there for some medical purpose. But I've been like combing through the text to find a medical rationale, but you simply don't find it. So what you see is that something that was referred to as a Shastra was referred to as being a fundamental book on which a particular school of thought followed. Even there, you have the Shastra helping a certain kind of patriarchal discourse, a certain kind of power dialogue, where women are supposed to stay inside the house. For instance, a menstruating woman was understood to be a person who was at the highest, or who has the highest degree of pollutive capability. So if you are near a menstruating woman, or if a menstruating woman enters the home, then the whole home was understood to be polluted. So then you would have to do purificatory rituals to cleanse the house. So, and this is not just recorded in other texts like the Manusmriti, which can be referred to as prescriptive texts. These are also mentioned in the Shastraic text, which gives these instructions more credence. So, and this is something that you see throughout, whether it is the early period or the medieval period, and then the production of these Ayurvedic texts, they were carried out well into the 18th and 19th centuries, and even there, you see these prescriptions and proscriptions against women. And why have they been put there? To restrict the mobility of women. Now, restricting the mobility of women was important for such a kind of power regime. Why? Because if you allow women to have freedom, since today is the Independence Day, if you allow women to have freedom, the possibilities of them interacting with people from other castes or other religions, they go up dimensionally. So
Mhm.
the mobility of women have to be restricted. And you also have to make sure, and remember, we're talking of times when the mortality rate is very, very high. So you have
Mhm.
more people dying of, more children dying of. So you have to make sure that there is a constant supply of human beings as well. When you're talking about production and reproduction, you also have to make sure that there is a certain number of human beings present so as to do the services, so as to make sure that the agriculture, so as to make sure that the trade continues at the same pace. You have to make sure that the production of human beings happen. And so women have to be shaped as a receptacle of production, particularly reproduction here, where they're
Mhm.
molded or shaped and fashioned as people who give birth, so that none of the other aspects of their identity are explored. So women would be considered as mothers or as people who will be mothers in the future.
This
So
is quite
that's
interesting, ma'am, because we have texts like these in the European context. We have Foucault, we have his history of sexuality specifically talks about this. But in the Indian context, we never had research like this. This was a huge gap. So I'm so grateful to you that you are working towards covering and bridging that gap.
Thank you so much. But we do have Uma Chakravarti and Professor Kumkum Roy who has written about it. I've just built upon the work that they have done, looking at gender from the perspective of the history of science, particularly through Ayurvedic process, which is something that others have not yet done.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you for finding my research interesting.
Absolutely. Um, so now, again, rooting from what you just said, so we often talk about the role of, so especially because we're sitting here on the Independence Day, we often talk about the role of women and children in India's freedom struggle across the years. But what do you think has India's role been in women and children's everyday struggle for freedom?
That's actually a brilliant question, and I believe that it's a very relevant question. But one also has to think, who are these women that we are talking about? And which children are we talking about? Are we talking about the Dalit women? Are we talking about tribal women? Or are we talking about middle class women or elite women? Women from the urban context or the rural context? Because their stories are different. We
Hmm.
cannot monolithize all women as having the same challenges and the same kind of issues,
Hmm.
historically or in present day. But having said that, if you look at, let's say, women from a constitutional or a lawmaking perspective, the whole idea of one person, one vote, this
Hmm.
was truly revolutionary, and that's a gift that the Indian national struggle has given us. If you
Hmm.
look at the history of other countries, like Sameen mentioned, of Europe or USA, what you see is that women had to struggle for the right to vote. So you had a separate suffragette movement, and in a lot of countries where women had to say that no, we also should be given the right to vote,
Hmm.
because women were considered to be inferior citizens or
Hmm.
secondary citizens. In India, after the international movement, every person, whether irrespective of your gender, irrespective of your caste, irrespective of your religion, irrespective of the language that you spoke, was given a vote. And then vote, and that's why I encourage our younger viewers to go out and vote the next time we have an election, because it's very, very important. There was a 100-year long struggle which gave us the power to elect our own leaders. And I think that's why youth today needs to be more interested and invested in politics. Doesn't mean that tomorrow all of us should get out on the street holding placards and start shouting slogans. No, it means that we should be aware of what is happening
Hmm.
around us. So back to the question of women and children. Now, as someone who has been closely following feminist movements and who identifies as a feminist, it certainly seems that we've been raising the same issues over and over and over again. It seems like we are on a loop, albeit in different circles. So, for instance, if you look at early feminist writings, uh, let's say from the 1920s, you'd see that they're also asking for representation. They're also asking for child marriage to be put to a stop. They're asking for dowry to be put to a stop. So,
Hmm.
and it's the same things that we're fighting for today. Maybe in different circles, maybe using a different vocabulary, maybe using different tools, but those fights are still ongoing struggles. And what also happened after the Indian national movement, because the Indian national movement was not one monolithic movement, it was different categories of movements sort of converging
Yeah.
into this one. So you
Oh.
have the social reform movement, for
Hmm.
instance, the fight against untouchability.
Hmm.
You have the consolidating movements. For instance, you have the self-respect movements happening in a lot of Indian states, where from the princely states there was a response against the British rule, response towards the Indian national movement, and then again you have a feminist strand within the Indian national movement. But within the Indian national movement, what also happened was that there was a certain fashioning of the quote unquote the ideal woman. And for the Indian national movement, the ideal woman again was the figure of the mother. Like you
Ah.
have Mother India who was iconized. So the
Hmm.
mother as the nurturer, the mother as the caregiver, the mother as the person who's the bearer of culture, the mother as the person who is responsible for child rearing and often solely responsible for child rearing. So all the fashioning of the ideal Indian woman, which happened hand in hand with the Indian national movement, was also today when I look at it, it was also problematic. And this has been an argument which has been put forth by other scholars like Professor Tanika Sarkar. So she argues that now, since the Indian national movement and the feminist movement went hand in hand, once freedom was achieved, the movement also came to a sudden halt without it achieving what it sought to achieve. So when this abrupt halt happened, then there was this huge gap, this wide gulf which happened between the feminist movement and the other political movements, which then divorced itself from its agenda of feminism. Now,
Hmm.
feminism, let me explain here. At that point of time, and even today, it's a movement for gender equality.
Hmm.
So when you had to recast women as people who would go out to work, the whole idea of her still being the mother
Hmm.
was something that she had to carry with herself. So as an Indian woman, you would end up doing whatever you had to do in your office or your firm, and then go back and do all the household chores. So that generation, for instance, the generation of my mother, for instance, from the 1950s to let's say the 1970s, this was a generation of super women who would do everything. They would look after children, they'd do their household chores, they would get up at 5 in the morning so that they could get to the office by 10, while also, not denting the patriarchal structure of the family. So you'd still have your father at 7 in the morning reading the newspaper very leisurely, while your mother's making idli and chapati and puri for you in the kitchen.
Hmm.
So the question is still relevant. How free are our women? Have they actually benefited from the idea of freedom or from the achievement of freedom that the Indian nation has achieved? Now, you can ask similar questions about the tribals. You can ask similar question about the Dalits. So,
Hmm.
has freedom trickled down to the last of us or to the most marginalized of us? That I
Hmm.
believe is a very, very, very relevant question. Now, at the same time, I'd also like to add that, one of the reasons why maybe we have not made much leeway. Now, I'm not discrediting the huge leaps that we have made. For instance, we have laws against dowry. We have a recent Supreme Court verdict which gives Hindu women the same rights as Hindu men. So I think these are indeed revolutionary steps. But a law is only a law if it is practiced. So even today, Indian women suffer from the problems of colorism, suffer from the problems of sexism, suffer from workplace harassment, suffer from EVs. So it's an ongoing struggle, but it's a struggle which I'm seeing a lot of hope in, because we have young people, and if I'm someone who follows my students' posts, because I'm also friends with them on social networks, and thankfully they let me be their friend. So I see a lot of hope there, and I'm very very hopeful about your generation, because you have young men who are unabashedly making claims that they're feminist, and I see the great hope there. You have young women who are ready to go out in the open and say that I've had it. And I think the Sarah Ahmad, the great renowned feminist, she talks about the feminist snap. That break even point where both women and men feel that we have had it. We need to move towards a brighter future. We need to do something in the right direction. I think we are almost there. Maybe it will take another year or two, but I'm someone who's very 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 hopeful.
And again, that raises the question that why not? And if not now, then when?
True,
I
true.
mean,
And I think the time is set post the 2012 Nirbhaya
mhm,
movement that we faced, when you had an
mhm,
extremely brutal, gruesome rape of this woman in a bus in Delhi. I think the
mhm,
kind of crowds that were out there in the street, irrespective of which political ideology you followed, irrespective of which class you belonged to, which religion you belonged to, it didn't matter. So it was a wake up call. It was a true wake up call that, unfortunately, a young woman had to be a martyr for it. But at the same time, it was a wake up call for the whole of India. And suddenly, the issue of sexual violence that women face on an everyday basis. Now, it might not be something uh, as grave as rape, but everyday instances of eve teasing or sexual or biased jokes that we are subject to. So all the now a new platform, and particularly because of the use of social networks and the new kinds of media that we have now to communicate over. There was this conversation, and it's an ongoing conversation. Thankfully, it didn't stop. Now, with a lot of movements, what happens is it fizzles out after a while. But
mhm,
thankfully, you had the Me Too movement, which happened in 2016, which also saw a lot of response. You had the Pinjara Tod movement in the Delhi
yes.
University, Ambedkar University, and Jawaharlal Nehru University in 2015. And then you also had several small movements, like in Aligarh, in Kottayam, in medical colleges across India, where young women started questioning the idea of the hostel curfew. Why, if
Uh,
young men can be allowed after 8 p.m. to be in the library, why can't young women be given the same rights? So suddenly there was this awakening. So it was not only the issue of sexual violence, which is something that needs to be talked about, but in general, there was a wake up call that gender discrimination is has become or has been part and parcel of Indian culture for a very long time, and it need to be questioned. While we can be very proud of our culture, we should also acknowledge that there are certain flaws, and only if we overcome those flaws we be truly proud. So I see hope, but there is a long way to go. Yeah, so I agree with your statement. If not now, when? Yeah, it has
and
to happen.
and also, there's one more thing that you said that uh, it's not about being politically radicalized, but also to be aware and form your opinions correctly. And
Absolutely.
it's not about jumping to conclusions. It's about learning and understanding and being aware of what is happening before you form a radical idea, which again I feel that a lot of people from my generation or even Sameen's generation, uh, they just quickly jump to forming conclusions and end up doing something which they were not supposed to do or they should not do. So it's obviously, again, as you said correctly, that it's very important to be aware of what is happening politically. You need not be extremely active, or you need not be radicalized by a certain idea. You need not decide for yourself whether you're rightist or the leftist, somewhere in the middle. Without all of that, just knowing that what's going on around you, I think
This,
that is something that's extremely important.
I agree with you to a certain extent, but I also feel, while the movement out in the streets are important, but at the same
Hmm.
time, the actual movement should happen within you. Going
Within.
back all the way to a slogan which was coined during second wave feminism, the
Hmm.
personal is political, and the most political arena that you can have is your home. So, a
Exactly.
South Indian academician, he made a remark recently and allowed that remark. I think it can extend to all of India,
Hmm.
where you can maybe analogize or you can think of our political correctness or of progressiveness as the very expensive woodland shoe that you wear. So you wear it outside, and the minute you come home, you take it off and you put it on a stand, and then you wear your
Sure.
very comfortable, comfortable chappals that you wear at home, which is stained by patriarchy, which is stained by casteism. So the actual revolution is a revolution which should happen inside your home.
Huh.
It should happen within you rather than it should happen outside, but at the same time the more intense, the more radical transformation should happen here in our hearts and in our minds and in our homes, and the way that we treat our fellow beings, whether it is our partners or whether it is our siblings or our parents or our children, so on and so forth. Like I
This
know
lockdown
feminists
has
who go
actually.
back. I'm sorry, Sameen. Huh?
No, please go on.
I was just saying, I know feminists who go back home, throw their let's say chola or whatever on the sofa and say, "Ma, one cup of coffee." And then suddenly it's like, where did your feminism go? Why are you not going and making a cup of coffee on your own, or asking your father to make a cup of coffee? So that's the kind of change which would be truly radical, rather than you making a lot of noise. If internally you're willing to let go of some of your your privileges as children, as people who belong to elite classes, and start questioning yourself, then that's where true change would actually happen. And I'm someone who believes that. I'm someone who believes that the personal is the most political of all terrains.
Yeah, actually agree with you. In this lockdown, this is the one thing that I've been working on since I'm stuck at home all the time. I've been trying to have discussions with my parents, my friends, and my cousins, whoever I can get a hold of, and having these discussions where which we wouldn't usually have. So it gives us the time. Actually, this has unusually given us the time to have these conversations here in this space.
Absolutely. I think for a lot of us, the lockdown has been a period of self interrogation, and also
Yeah.
of communicating with your close circle, with your intimate sphere. For instance, I was someone who was not home for about 7 years now, with my mom constantly nagging me to come back home, and the COVID gave me time to reconnect with my family. But at the same time, we also have to think of the number of domestic violence cases that has gone up all throughout our country, all throughout the world, which is a very grave issue. So I have friends uh, who call me up and say they have nowhere to go now. The office for many of them was a safe space as compared to the house. So for 7 hours a day, 8 hours a day, you could actually be in a space where you are thought of as a person who's no longer a mother, who's no longer a wife. Not that those titles are bad. I'm not saying that, but where you could find your own space, where you do work and you're appreciated for it, or you get rewarded for it. So and you don't you're not burdened by the idea of doing household chores. You're not burdened by the idea of being the bearer or the say or the guardian of culture, where you could be your own or on your own. So that safe space has been lost now with work from home.
I
And
think we
plus,
have gone back to that 50s to 70s era where women used to be superwomen and they would do everything. It's almost the same now. So,
almost. But on the other hand, I think at least with your generation, a whole generation of young people and children have realized that there's a whole lot of work that women do,
yeah,
because they get to see
I
it, right?
definitely
When you get
realized
to see
that.
a mom work, and then you're suddenly like, oh my god, that magic drawer which is replenished with fresh laundry done. There's a person behind it who does it actually for you. So the bed which is magically made when you come back from school, you see
Hmm.
the person making the bed, and suddenly there's this realization of the care, of the significance of care work and the nurturing work, and work which is unpaid labor, by the way, which is
Hmm.
provided by women. So I think that has dawned upon a lot of young people and a lot of men, and I think that's the positive side of it. Though we
Hmm.
can talk of dime a dozen issues which both women and people who belong to marginalized communities face. For instance, domestic helps. They're
Hmm.
facing the brunt of the lockdown, with a lot of them being out of work. So you have housing boards, you have flat association, housing communities not allowing them to come in because they're understood to be the bearers of disease. Now, this is something that I can analogize with, let's say, Mesopotamian history, when you had a whole set or an epidemic spreading through Mesopotamia. Instead of the state taking care of the people, the state let entire villages die off out of starvation so as to eliminate the probability of disease. So imagine a situation where your domestic help or my domestic help is deprived of her livelihood. Now, how will her children go to school? Now, they might not have a smartphone. Now, today because we come from privileged communities and gated communities at that, we at least have a laptop, we have a smartphone which our children can use to access education. But what about them? And it's also a denial of future for them, isn't it? Because in 1 year's time, when they have no other way to educate children, they will, of course, teach their children their, unfortunately, other ways of living and other ways of livelihood.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, we might have a huge child labor issue in the post-COVID times, because if it's 6 months or a year, then it's not just the economy; it's a culture that would be set in by that time. And then those are some of the issues that we need to think about.
Absolutely. So, I
I'm sorry
mean,
if I painted a very grim picture.
no, no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So, while I was listening to what he was saying, I was also going through the comments, and Dr. Tanaya Narendra, if I'm not wrong, Sameen, she's in line for the next live. If I- So she really liked your chappal analogy, and which is something that I think is a big takeaway for me as well, because
Oh, thank you. I'm just building on an analogy just made by a Malayali academician called Sunil P. Ledam.
so uh, actually again with Sakshi via the Rakshan project, when we reach out to colleges and when we talk to them, uh, I often sometimes find explaining a few concepts very difficult, which is why I am always on the lookout for analogies like this. So this is also in a way helpful for me, because the next time I'm interacting with college students and I have to explain to them something, this is obviously a way I can explain things to them.
Yeah,
We have
sorry.
uh, we have one question in the comment by Nayar Parveen, who asks, I want to know which was the era which made women a commodity for household chores.
Oh, this is a fascinating question, because if you look at food production in
Hmm.
particular, from the very early period, for instance, you have Tamara Bray and Maria Wyke writing about the association between food production activities and gender roles, particularly gender roles prescribed for women, as early as the 4th century BCE, and even probably even before that. If you look at figurines from, let's say, Egypt, or figurines, let's say, from Mesopotamia, you would see women engaged in food production. But at the same time, you also have figurines of men. Let me also put that. So it probably has a very long history. But if it's in the Indian context, since I'm an Indian historian, the first references which binds women
যে
to the
হার্ড
kitchen.
ড্রাইভটা খুললে ওটা একটা কম্পিউটারে লাগে দাও না। হ্যালো?
Hello.
Yes, Swarnim.
Huh, would be in the Grihya Sutras. Now, Professor Jaya Tyagi has done incredible work on the Grihya Sutras, where and if you even if you look at the Kama Shastra or the Kama Sutra, when we think of the Kama Sutra, you think that it's a book which is about love making, but it's not just about that. So you have entire sections on the roles which women are supposed to play. And if you look at the literature there, then one of the things that a woman has to be an expert in is in cooking. So while a Ganika, a person who can be referred to as, let's say, a courtesan, if you're using today's parlance, she was supposed to be well versed in 64 arts. Imagine 64 kinds of arts, which included writing, which included weaving, which included music. So that was the kind of education that women of a particular category received even at that point of time. But you also had uh, a woman, let's say, who belonged to the elite classes or the non-elite classes. If she was a wife, if she chose to be a wife, then obviously there are huge prescriptions, huge chapters which mention that she has to do all the household chores, she has to look after the children, she has to be an expert in cooking, so on and so forth. So I'm not able to put a finger on that one period where the association between household chores and women came to be, but it is part and parcel of our Smriti literature. That's something that I can say for sure. So in Vedic literature, you do not find many references to it, though there are references to cooking. Uh, so probably from the post-Vedic period. I'm just eyeballing it here.
I think we are coming towards the end of the session.
Yes.
We had a lot more questions, but I
We
don't think
had
we'll be able to cover them.
we had some more questions, true, but we are at a very strict timeline of 40 minutes only.
Sure.
Yeah.
It
Um,
always takes time.
but thank you so much for coming online and having this interaction with us. I mean,
So
the
thank
No,
you
amount
ma'am,
of
so
it
much.
was really great.
the information that you shared, your analogies, and the and how you and the articulate way that you explained it to all of us, I think that is something that a lot of us are going to retain for a very, very long time. On that note, all the viewers here, I would like to tell all of you that we conduct a free view webinar every Sunday, and uh, Dr. Malvika, you and all our viewers, I would invite all of you for a free view webinar tomorrow and every subsequent Sunday. This Sunday, which is tomorrow, is going to be a session in Hindi, and next Sunday is going to be in English, and that's how we do it every alternate week. So I extend my invitation to all the people who are watching this video right now, and to you, Dr. Malvika, especially as well.
Thank you so much. I had a great time with both of you. And keep up
It
all the
was
good work
really
that you're
lovely, ma'am,
doing.
talking
It's
to
very,
you.
very relevant. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
ma'am.
Stay at home, stay safe, we were told. But what if homes are not safe for 1 out of 2 children in our country? Sakshi has been working to make homes safe for the last 28 years. At this critical time, we've stepped up what we've been doing because every home has to be a safe space.